Hello and welcome to the Characteristics of Life notes. In this set of notes, we are going to focus on what makes a living thing alive and why it is important to study living things. I am now going to show you a short little video to introduce the characteristics of life. There are 8 characteristics of life to distinguish if something is alive or not. So here is clue number 1. Take a second by pausing the video and see if you can figure out what these pictures are trying to show you. Clue number 2, again, pause the video and try to figure out what these pictures are trying to show you and see if you can come up with one word to classify these pictures. Clue number 3. Clue number 4, we have a gentleman sweating, a woman shivering, another person getting goosebumps. Clue number 5, again, try to find one word that could classify these pictures. So we have a chameleon turning colors, a polar bear in the white snow, and we also have 2 moths actually on this tree. So we have a lightly colored moth, a white color, and a dark colored moth. So what do you think these pictures are trying to tell you? Clue number 6, we have an egg and a sperm on the left, and then a mommy kitty with her kittens on the right. clue number 7, we have a person eating a hamburger, and the picture on the right, we have a leaf taking in some sunlight. Finally, clue number 8, for this one, you need to think outside the box a little. So hopefully you were able to get at least a couple of the clues from the previous slides. If you remember the acronym GO SHARED, you will always remember the 8 characteristics of life. So let's go through each characteristic and understand what they mean. Biology is the study of life. It is useful for disease prevention, medical treatments, helps us protect the environment, a lot more things that we'll learn throughout this school year. And in order for us to study living things, we need to be able to determine if something is living or non-living. So there's no single characteristic that is enough to describe a living thing. Some non-living things will have some of these characteristics, but if they do not have all 8 characteristics of GO SHARED, they are not considered living. In science, we have a little more scientific terms to describe something that is living and non-living, and we call them abiotic and biotic factors. So abiotic are non-living things. They are important to our world, but they are things like in this picture, sunlight, temperature, altitude, pollution, nutrients, pH, climate. Those are all things that are not living. Biotic factors are things that deal with living things or once living things. And these are also important components to our world. So things like people, the tree in the picture, cells, mold, plants, bacteria, dolphins, fish, birds. I could keep going on and on. So when we say living, you also could use the word biotic. And if you're talking about non-living things, you could say abiotic. So the first letter in GO SHARED stands for grow and develop. So on our clue slide, I had a growth chart of a person and then also the pictures of the kids when they were young and the pictures once they got older. So during growth, a single cell will divide again and again, and we'll talk about this later on in the school year when we talk about mitosis and meiosis. And during development, an organism goes through changes to become an adult. So we have a baby, and then it becomes a toddler, and then gets bigger and becomes a teen, and then becomes adult. So throughout the person's lifespan, the cells are dividing, they're growing, some are dying. When you are older, you don't have larger cells, you have the same size cells, it's just larger organisms have more cells. All living things start out as one cell, and again they divide and divide and divide until again it's making something larger and larger. The O stands for organized, so all living things are organized. And more specifically, we're talking about the cells. So living things are made up of one or more cells. The smallest unit considered fully alive is a cell because within a cell, they have all 8 characteristics that all living things need to have. So cells can grow, respond to their surroundings, they can reproduce. Despite their small size, cells are complex and highly organized. For example, a single branch of a tree will contain millions of cells. If we take a look at this picture up here, that's also on your paper. So we have the smallest thing that in this picture is an atom, and an atom isn't alive. Again, we said the smallest thing that's considered alive is a cell. So all things that are considered matter are made up of atoms. So we have atoms, and if we put more atoms together, we have things called molecules, which still might not necessarily be alive. And then a molecule are made up of cells, and within a cell we have smaller things called organelles, which we'll talk a little about in a little bit and then further along throughout the school year. Cells can come together to make tissues, and tissues can come together to make organs, and organs can come together to make body systems, and body systems come together to make organisms. Organisms come together to make populations. Populations make community. Communities make ecosystem, and so on and so forth. So this is what the organization that we're talking about. Here are two types of cells that we'll mainly look at through this school year. So we have animal cells and plant cells. So animal cells typically tend to be rounder, where plant cells tend to be more rectangular and square. They have some of the same organelles. So again, organelles are inside of a cell. So here are some things that you might remember from past science classes. So they both have a nucleus. They both have the liquid inside, which is called the cytoplasm. They both have the cell membrane. So the cell membrane is the outside structure of an animal cell, but it's not the outside of a plant cell, because plant cells also have a cell wall. They have things that help produce energy, which is the mitochondria. Plant cells have a large vacuole to help store water, and then plant cells also have chloroplasts that help with the process of photosynthesis. There are other organelles not in this picture that we will talk about throughout the school year, but here are just a couple examples. Some organisms are made up of just one cell, and some organisms are made up of millions and millions of cells. So like I said, within a cell, whether it's single cellular or multicellular, we have these organelles that help organize and facilitate the function of the cell, because each organelle has a very specific function. And like I said in the previous slide, larger things like an elephant, rhinoceroses, they don't have larger cells than us. They have the same similar size cells. They just have more cells altogether. And what I would like you to do is I would like you to flip your paper over, take a minute and try to fill in the blanks for the example of the organization characteristic of Go Shared. So before we move on to the S in Go Shared, you have the picture of the different types of cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, and organism. So it said, based on this picture above, complete the following. A group of the same type of cells make up, and you should have filled in tissues. Number 2, a group of different cells or tissues working together make up a organ. And an organism's body has organ systems made up of several organs, all working for the same purpose. The S in Go Shared stands for external stimuli. A stimulus is anything that provokes a response. For example, some plants can produce unsavory chemicals to ward off caterpillars that feed on their leaves, or plants tend to grow towards the light sources, and if the direction of the light changes, the plant will also change. So a stimuli that may cause a response in organisms are things like light, temperature, sound, pressure, gravity, odor, water, chemicals. So here I have a picture of a hot frying pan. I want you to think about, if you were to touch it, what would the stimulus be and what would the response be? After thinking about it, the stimulus would be the hot pan, and the response would be that I know if I touched a hot pan, I would pull my hand away. The H in Go Shared stands for homeostasis. So all living things maintain homeostasis. And this is probably the most difficult one for most students to get, just because they might not have ever heard of the term homeostasis. So all living organisms expend energy to keep conditions inside their cells within certain limits, and this condition or process is called homeostasis. And if you Googled the definition or looked up the definition of homeostasis, it means to regulate your internal environment or maintain an internal balance or equilibrium. So if we take a look at our picture here, this woman is jogging. Her body is trying to maintain homeostasis. She is sweating. Because she's sweating, she might be losing some water, so her kidneys help maintain her water balance. The blood distributes heat throughout the body, so she's probably getting warmer and she doesn't want to have to overheat. The pancreas helps to regulate sugars, so again, she's using energy, burning fat, using some glucose from her food that she ate, so her pancreas needs to make sure her sugar levels are regulated so she doesn't faint while she's running. So some things your body keeps constant are blood sugar, your acid base, so you don't want your pH too high, you don't want your pH too low, your water balance, so you don't want it to be dehydrated, your pH and your temperature. So some things that are evidence that show your body exhibiting homeostasis is sweating, shivering, panting. You can think of homeostasis similar to making hot chocolate. If you add a little extra chocolate syrup, you'll probably add a little more milk to help maintain the perfect chocolate to milk ratio. This is similar to what happens in our body. Too much or too little of something can disrupt the processes in our body. Homeostasis makes sure everything inside our body stays at the correct ratio. If there's too much of something, our body gets rid of it. If there's too little of something, our body will try to produce it. The A stands for to adapt and evolve. Adapt means to adjust to your environment or surroundings. Evolve means to change over time. So we will have a whole evolution unit later on in the school year that we will focus more on this topic. Adaptations are the result of evolution. It can be due to a gene mutating or changes just by accident. Some examples of a species exhibiting adaptation is their color, patterns, body shape. These are adaptations that help camouflage both the predator and the prey. So if you think back to my clue page, I had 3 examples. One was a chameleon turning different colors to blend into its environment. Then there was a polar bear in the snow. And then I had 2 different colored moths on a tree. So these species might have not had a certain adaptation that they have acquired over time initially, but as certain species are better suited for their environment, they'll be able to survive and reproduce. So if you think about the moths examples, the dark colored moth was better able to blend into its environment versus the white colored moth. So a predator would be able to see the lighter colored moth easier and would probably get picked off by a bird or another predator and die off, and the dark colored moth would be able to survive, reproduce, and pass on those genes to their offspring. So over time we would see the moth population go from whatever percentage the dark colored to light colored moth would be to more dark colored. The R stands for reproduction, so all living things will reproduce. Living things reproduce, which means that they produce new similar organisms. Most plants and animals engage in sexual reproductions in which cells from 2 parents unite to form the first cell of a new organism. Other organisms can reproduce through asexual reproduction, in which a single organism produces offspring identical to itself. So when we think about asexual reproduction, we will be looking at 2 specific types of cells, eukaryotes and prokaryotes. And prokaryotes, such as bacteria, and some eukaryotes, such as protists and other unicellular fungi, will reproduce asexually. And again, their offspring will be identical to the original parent cell versus sexual reproduction. They will be similar, but there will be some differences. The E and Go Shared stands for energy, so all living things require energy. And not only do they need to obtain that energy, they need to break it down to get that energy into the cells through the process of metabolism. Organisms are either able to eat food, which are heterotrophs, which more specifically we think of animals and people, or they can make their own food, which we call autotrophs, which are plants. Plants make their own food through the process of photosynthesis, which we'll talk about later on in the school year. Requiring energy, we're talking about eating, breathing, excreting the waste. That all happens through metabolism. So when living things use energy,
They break down high energy molecules like sugar to get the energy they need, and then in the result, they will give off their waste, which is carbon dioxide, as a byproduct. Lastly, the D stands for DNA. All organisms store their complex information they need to live, grow, and reproduce in a genetic code written in a molecule called deoxyribonucleic acid, also known as DNA. So every single cell in your body has the exact same DNA. Whatever genes you inherit from your parents, your eye color, your hair color, your skin color, all that information is stored within your DNA. In conclusion, all living organisms must show all 8 characteristics of life: growth, organized, stimuli and response, homeostasis, adapt and evolve, reproduce, require energy, and DNA. Dead or once living organisms once showed all 8 characteristics of life, but do not. And some living, non living things will have some of the characteristics, but they won't have all 8.